Hi, everyone. Welcome to GroningenPHP. This is PHP 8.1, what's new and changed. We will be talking about the new features in PHP, some of the changes we have, and we also have some deprecations. Before we start, I posted the link to the slides and the description to the talk in the chat, and you can also scan the QR code if you like to kind of follow along the code snippets in a different monitor or something. My name is Ayesh Karunaratne. I was born and raised in Sri Lanka, but I was traveling to many places, including the Netherlands. I was living there in Germany, Vietnam, and now I'm back in Sri Lanka. A few years ago, I started a website called php.watch, right here, that I write about what's new, what's changed in PHP. I've been doing this for around 3 years now, and here we are talking about PHP 8.1. If you have any questions or if you would like to reach out, please feel free to send me a message or see me on Twitter. I will try to reply to all of the questions and comments as well. Okay, back to PHP 8.1. Now, PHP 8.1, it's not even released yet. We had PHP 8.0 last year, and PHP 8.1, we will have it on end of this month. So we have exactly 3 weeks before we have a final release that we suggest to use in production environments. So we have three weeks to try PHP 8.1, take a look at what's new features, and see if we can use some of these features to improve our PHP applications. We also have some changes that might break existing websites, applications. So we also have some time to try PHP 8.1 as well. I will be talking about, for the most part, new features in PHP. So by far, my favorite feature, and I think the biggest change in PHP 8.1 is called enums. With enums, you can have a new data type, so you don't have to validate individual items. For example, if you have a function, you can use this a new type. You can create a new type, and then you can enforce this type with function calls, and every time that you return something, and pretty much everywhere that PHP uses types. There's also a feature called fibers. So most of the PHP history, PHP has been always a linear programming language. So we execute one line and then after another, after another. Sometimes we call functions, but we always finish these functions. With fibers, it's a stepping stone to have concurrent PHP versions, concurrent applications, as in we can have two executing threads that execute one time and then it moves to the other and then moves back to the other. This is a building block that we can have multi-threaded PHP applications. So that's in PHP 8.1 as well. I will be also talking about a feature called read-only properties. It is a way to make sure that class properties, you can only write them once. And after you write to these properties, you can never change these properties. This helps you to reduce some of the boilerplate code that we use to prevent someone from modifying the property. And now with read-only properties, if you declare that this property is read-only, PHP will make sure that no one else can override these values. We have been making many improvements to the type system for many years now. And PHP 8.1 also has its share of improvements with the type system. I will also kind of run through some of the smaller scale changes in PHP. And in 8.1, we have some functionality that changed between 8.0 to 8.1. And there's a possibility that some of the applications might break in PHP 8.1. I will try to explain some of these tricky scenarios. There are some deprecations in PHP 8.1 as well. So how PHP works is that with each PHP version, we try to deprecate some of the features that we would like to remove in the next major PHP version. So PHP 8.1, end of this year, PHP 8.2, end of next year, we deprecate some features that we don't think are no longer necessary, or sometimes they are counterintuitive with the rest of the functions. And when PHP 9 will be released, we don't really know when, but it's a way of communicating that we are deprecating these features and we will be removing them in PHP 9. I will also talk about some of the backwards compatibility issues, because most of the new features in PHP 8.1, unfortunately, it's not possible to use them with all the PHP versions, but some of them can be used. I will try to show which features can be used with all the PHP versions and which features we can use with new PHP versions. We will also take a look at how we can try PHP 8.1 today. It's not released yet, like I said before, but it's very much possible to try PHP 8.1 today. And I would say we would rather better test them out before PHP 8.1 is released, because we have plenty of time to try these features. Throughout this talk, I will take more time for new features and enums in particular, because that's my personal favorite feature. And I think that's where the most impact of it PHP 8.1 will be. And this is a longer presentation, so make yourself comfortable, get some coffee, get some tea. So let's get started. New features. The first one is enums. Before I talk about enums, let's take one example from, let's say, this is an example from Drupal. So here we have an interface that has 3 constants. So they are constants that we use for, let's say, a hidden comment or a closed comment or an open comment. So if you have a comment object, and if you want to store if it's open or if it's hidden or if it's closed, you can use these constants with a function calls these constants. So we have this imaginary function call that we use set comment status, and we use one of these labels from this interface. So in this call, we use comment item interface, which is here, and hidden, which is here. But we are lying here, because although we see that this is comment item interface hidden, this is actually an integer. So this is what we see in the code, but for PHP, this is still an integer. In fact, if you want to have a list of valid options, let's say you have a function called getValueOptions, you have to duplicate all of these values, hidden, closed, and open, and you have to duplicate all of these values every time that you have to have a list of valid options. If you have a select list with all the valid values, you have to duplicate all of these values over and over. This is a very similar or very common thing that we do on Drupal, we do on Symfony, and most of the PHP applications we have today. This is the best practice, because it keeps the class constants inside the single class. It's easy to read, but it's not really perfect, because this is a problem. although we want every item, every value that you pass to this function to be an integer, be a valid value from here, you cannot really express this as a type. So from here, we have to say we are expecting an integer. But like I said before, we are lying here because we cannot expect any integer. We are just saying we will accept integers, but we know that it has to be 0, 1, or 2. The most common way to fix this is every time that you pass a value, we check this incoming value against a list of values we know. So once again, we had to duplicate all of these values every time we need to have a list of values, and every time we need to validate an incoming value against a list of values that we know. Now that we have enums, let's see how we can improve that old example using enums. So what I do here is I create a new type using the syntax called enum, and I can give it any name. So in this case, I'm going to create a new enum called enum comment status, and I can put all of the value states that I had before from the interface into this enum. So using this, we have this interface that had constants hidden, closed, and open. And because we have moved them to this new interface, this new enum, we can remove these class constants. And from this function, instead of saying we will accept any integer, we can say we will accept any value from this enum comment status. And the beautiful thing here is that PHP can do the validation for us. So every time someone passes a value, it will check if this value belongs to one of these values. So these are the one we call members. So because PHP is doing this type validation for us, we don't actually have to do the validation ourselves. So we can remove this code as well. So what we end up is much cleaner code base, because we just pass the responsibility of validating incoming values and having a list of values to PHP using an enum. So when you call this function, called set comment status, we follow the similar syntax saying comment status open. This will work. But if you try to parse any value that's not valid, say we are saying here that we will accept any value from comment status. But all of these examples, we parse values that are not one of these members. So here, this is a different class constant or different value from an enum. With the second example, we pass a string, which is not accepted by here. You cannot pass null values. You cannot pass float values. All of these cases, PHP will throw a type error saying this function, the argument 1 state, must be a type of comment status, which is here. So this is the useful part of enums, as in we don't have to do any validation. PHP will do the validation for us. This makes the code more safer. In case you forgot to add this validation, PHP will do this job for us. So PHP will make sure that every time someone passes a value, this is one of the valid values that PHP can handle. In fact, we already had enums with PHP, the Boolean type. Every time we say we will accept a Boolean value, what we are essentially saying is that you can pass true, you can pass false, but nothing else. And this has been in PHP forever, right? So the idea with enums is that you can create any name type, and you can put any number of members, which is I use this example from Boolean to explain that we already had Booleans and we have been enjoying these sort of enumerated types. now we can expand it to our own types as well. So to go through everything, with the syntax here is that we use the keyword enum, and you can give it any name that you like to have. It can have 0 or many members. So this is a valid enum. This is also a valid enum. You can have 0, you can have 4 members, you can have 10,000 members, you can have any number of members. And they are internally objects. So if you try to access suit hearts, which is here, it will say it is an object. It's not a string, it's object. And PHP 8.1, there's a new syntax. If you call the var dump function, it will show that this is a type of enum. Although is object size true, it's actually a different struct with PHP. You can have namespaces to enums as well. So this is very useful because you can organize your code examples to the same namespace. So you can use unique names as long as you can use common names as long as the unique there's a unique namespace. And another feature with enums is that you can assign a value to them. So imagine we have to store these values in a database, or we have to pass these values to a JSON API response. We can assign string values or integer values, but not together. And we can translate back and forth between the enumerated object or the string or integer value. So this is an example using integers. This is an example using strings. It can also contain constants. So now if you take a look here, they use the same syntax. You use suit, double colon awesome, or double colon clubs. You can use class constants, but they have to be unique. Each of these enumerated type, it can have static methods as well. So if you like to have a method called suit cheer, you can actually do that, and that's completely valid with PHP. Each of these members, they can also have methods here. So if you like to show, for example, if you like to call a method called show, you can declare this function and it will work pretty much similar that way as well. With PHP class objects, we have a special variable called $this. It works with enums as well. And every time that you refer to this object, it refers to the enumerated type itself. But the most useful thing here is that you can get the name of the enumerated type, enumerated member back using this special property called name. So from this example, I'm trying to access this. This property called name, and it would show the name of this member. And there's a property called value as well. So if you have an enum with the back value, for example, a string, you can access these values as well. So this is my favorite slide because it shows how similar enums are to classes. So we can have class constants, we can have functions, we can have static functions. So enums and classes are very similar. So like I said before, they also, both of classes and enums, they both support namespaces. They both support using traits, similar to here. You can use auto-loading. So if there's, if PHP doesn't know, if PHP cannot find an enum with this name, it will try to auto-load just like it does with the classes. If there's a class name that PHP doesn't recognize, PHP tries to load this class using SPL autoload functions. PHP will do the same thing for enums as well. It also supports magic constants, for example, here, and these ones. You can use instance of operator to see if a value belongs to this enum. So you can have $card instance of suit or value instance of post status. This instances operator, it works with PHP 8.1 enums as well. It can also support methods. So you can have, just like you do with classes, you can have a function or a method that you can call on behalf of this enum. But the most important thing with enums, and I can't stress this enough, is that enums, you cannot have state, because fundamentally, a class object is different from an enumerated type, because this is an object that can have properties, but with enums, it's a type. So it's not supposed to have any state. So if you would like to store any of the properties there, enums is not the answer. Enums are better when we use them as a type to validate a fixed number of objects, fixed number of members. Enums works beautiful. And enum members are identical. Like I said before, enums do not contain state. So if you have an enum that comes from database, and if you have an enum that comes from a form submission, you can compare and they will be equal. So from the last example, we had comment status, and you can assign it a value. So using here, let's see how we can use enums in a real life PHP application. This is an example of that you insert something to a database. So from the database connection, we pass a value, an array of fields, and then we save them to a database table called my table. Like we mentioned before, you can access all of these values using the property called value. So comment status, we access the value using the value property, and it will be 0, 1, or 2. So you can actually put them on a database. This is another example. So when we say we are selecting all fields, we are selecting the entity ID field from this table called my table, and we would like the status field to be this one, open. So here we use the name comment status, which is the name of the enum, and then we access this individual property, which is open, and then we access the property itself that says 2. So for the SQL database, what it says is that select all of this SQL query here, where status is equal to number 2. So for the database, it's a completely valid SQL query. If you would like to take the values back, so imagine we have a form submission, and there's a select list that uses select from the comment status. So it's hidden, closed, or open. But the user is sending us 0, 1, or 2. If you would like to get the object back from one of these values, we can use this. We can use the name of the enum, and we have a special method called from, and then we parse an integer value here that will return the enum object. So enums are objects, so you can use the method called from that returns the enum member by its value. There's also a method called try from. So if you pass try from and pass a value that's not valid, for example, if you have comment status try from, and if you pass 10,000, Try from method will return null, and the from method will return will throw an exception saying there's no enumerated member by this value. This is as far as I would like to talk about enums, because there are so many other features that are still as exciting. I have some resources if you would like to take a look or have some more examples with enums at the end of the session. So we move on to the next big feature in PHP. Fibers is sometimes we also call them green threads. It's a way to have lightweight and controlled concurrency to PHP. So these two words are very important. So it's controlled, as in you can have two threads that talk to each other and then parse the execution between each other. So normally, PHP applications, they go linearly. So it starts the application and it moves on from one function to another, and then all the way to the end. With concurrent execution, we can separate the execution between two threads. So you can have one functionality here, and then you move to the other thread. And from this thread, you move back to the first thread, and you can move to another thread if you would like to. We can have multiple threads. So from this here, we can pause from the main thread to another. We pause back, we pause back. So with fibers, we can start. Normally, PHP will start as a regular PHP execution. And with fibers, you can create a new fiber using this new syntax called fiber, a new fiber class object. It would create a new thread. So you can start a fiber at any time that you like to start. And when you call start, PHP will start to execute the fiber and not the main thread. So it executes. And if the fiber would like to suspend, it can pass back to the main thread anytime that it likes to. And from the main thread, it can resume the execution anytime that it likes to. So when we call resume, PHP passes back to the fiber, and it will execute whatever we have from the point that we suspended last time. And we can suspend again, we go back to the main thread, we can go back to the fiber, and this is why I say it's called controlled execution, as in the main thread, it can pass, and from the other thread, it can pass back to the main thread. So it's controlled between each thread. The way this works is there's a new object called fiber. So we create a new object called new fiber, and we can pass a function to it. So what we do essentially is that we have a different program that we would like to run inside another thread. So we pass, we create a new class object from fiber with this function name, or a callable value. PHP will execute it from there. And every time that fiber suspends, it passes back to the main thread. So this example, let's see how it normally executes. So it starts from the top. We are saying echo main started. So you can see the output on the right side. PHP will go to the next step, which is creating a new fiber. But the important thing is that it doesn't execute anything. It just creates a new fiber. So like I said, it creates a new thread and does not really start anything. And after that, it goes to the next step, which says fiber start. And then PHP will pass the execution, controlled execution, to the new thread. So from the new thread, it calls echo fiber started. So you can see the output here. And the next one is fiber suspend. So from the fiber, it passes back the control to the main thread. So PHP will start to execute from the time that it code started. And now we have the other value, other statement saying a core fiber returned. So you can see the output here. And the next step is to resume. The cool thing with fibers is that instead of starting the whole function from the top, PHP will execute the rest of the function. So it actually goes back to the same fiber and it goes back to the same fiber and start from where it left off. So now we are saying fiber resumed. And finally, because we came to the end of the fiber, we go back to the main thread, and then we can echo fiber ended. So if I go back to the same, if I go back very fast, you can see we start from here, create a new fiber, start the fiber, and then we go to here, suspend. So we give the control back. We are in the main thread. We resume to the thread. It shows something, and then we come to the end. So we go back to the main thread. This new fiber class has a few more methods that you can see if fiber is running. You can see if the fiber has suspended, or if you can see if the fiber has terminated, as in it came to the end of the execution. Fibers can pass values between each thread. So from the main thread, you can pass values to the fiber. From the fiber, you can pass values back to the main thread. It can communicate with other fibers as well. This is kind of feature complete, so to speak. But as of now, you cannot execute fibers in parallel. It always has to be control execution. So you start from one fiber, move to the other, and then we'll move back to the other. But as of now, you cannot run two fibers at the same time, which could be made possible with other PHP extensions. But with PHP core, you cannot still do parallel execution. It's still controlled execution back and forth. I have some very detailed examples on this link as well. Now that we talked about the two major features, let's take a look at some of the smaller features with PHP 8.1. The third one is called read-only properties. This is rather simple restriction to make sure that you can write to a class property once, and you can never override this value. This gives us the guarantee that you can have a value object, and it's pretty much guaranteed that no one will change this value. So if you have a user account with, say, a user object that the user ID should never change, this is a candidate to use read-only properties, because if someone tries to change the user ID, there could be some problems, right? So if you would like to restrict someone from modifying the user ID property, we can declare it as read-only, and PHP will make sure that no one can override this. So the way this works is, this is a sample user object. So we have this property called, this public property called with the type integer, and it's called UID. We will declare that this is a read-only property, and if you try to override this value once again, so from here, we write this value once. This is allowed, but every time we try to write again to this property, PHP will throw an error saying you cannot modify this read-only value because you have already written this property. It also prevents you from writing a value outside of the class. So here we update the value from inside the class. But if you try to modify a value from outside, PHP will also say you cannot write to this read-only property because we declare that this is just read-only. We also have some type system improvements. The first one is called intersection types. The first one is called intersection types. With PHP 8.0, we had union types. So you can create a new function or return type saying, I will accept any value, for example, string or integer. With intersection types, we are doing the opposite, saying all of the values that you parse, it must belong to this class and this class. So all of the values that you parse, it must belong to both of these classes. So in this example, you can use the syntax, not this example, for intersection types, you can use the and sign here to combine two types. So here we are essentially saying is that all of the values that you pass to this function, count and iterate, it must belong to both of these types. So from here, this is a candidate. This is the kind of classes that we expect because it implements iterator and it also implements countable. And together, we make this an intersection type. So all of the values that you pass to this function, it must implement both of these interfaces. I don't think there are examples from existing applications that you can actually make use of this, but this makes PHP more complete with the type system because we have union types that we can say we will accept either of these values, and intersection types that we say all of the values must implement both of these interfaces. There's also a new type called a return type called never. So PHP 7.1, we have a new type called void. And with never type, what we are essentially saying to PHP is that if you call this function, this PHP application will stop from here. And if it tries to return a value or if it tries to not do anything, PHP will throw an error saying, hey, you said that this function is a never function, but you're trying to return something or you're trying to continue the execution. So never type, you can use them on functions that terminate the execution of a PHP application. So if you would like to throw an error page, you can declare that this function is never, has the type never, because we don't intend to continue the execution of the application from this point. Because this is declared never, with the function that is declared never, if you try to return the value, PHP throws a fatal error saying this never function, it should never return any value. And if you don't return a value, if you don't return a value, or if you don't terminate the execution, PHP also throws an error saying this is implicitly returning a value. So you are not allowed to do this. We also have a few new features. There's a feature called final class constants, which essentially means that all of the class constants, you can declare that they are final. So if you have a class that extends another class, it's not allowed to override a constant with the final keyword. We have a couple of functions called fsync, fdatasync that we use to flush some of the temporary caches back to the disk. Some of the important features for me personally is that PHP has two new hashing algorithms called XS hash and murmur hash. XSS hash in particular, this is ridiculously fast, as in it can calculate the hash almost on the same speed that you can read from your disk. So it's very fast for hashing algorithm. It's not suitable for anything related to security, but if you have a bunch of files that you would like to see if they're equal, you can use XS hash. They are much faster than SHA-1, SHA-2, or SHA-3, and pretty much every other hashing algorithm we have in PHP. I did a benchmark. This is by far the fastest hashing algorithm we have in PHP, and in generally in computing as well. So
Even MD5?
with other applications that use hashing algorithms, XS hash is very fast, and PHP 8.1 supports these two new algorithms as well. Now that we talked about some of the new features, we'll take a look at some of the change functionality here as well. So for existing applications, I think this would be the most painful change in PHP 8.1. This is called tentative return types. It essentially means that if you extend one of the PHP built-in classes, they now contain a return type. So before PHP 8.1, this is a real interface that we had in PHP. But take a look here, there's no return type. But with PHP 8.1, they have return types, but they are not exactly enforced. They are tentative, or they are coming soon return types. The change here is that if you implement one of these interfaces, or if you extend a PHP built-in class, you have to define return type. So from here, I have this method called offsetExist, which has a tentative return type saying Boolean. In my implementation, I do not have return type. This was fine in PHP 8, PHP 7.4, all of these PHP functions, this was completely fine. But with PHP 8.1, it throws a deprecation warning saying this method should be compatible with the other method. So from main PHP declaration, it must be compatible with our declaration. Or you can add an attribute called return type will change to temporary, like silent this deprecation notice. If you add the Boolean type, PHP will shut up, and this is the ideal fix. If we can afford to use PHP 7.0, you can do this, and this fixes all of the things. Alternately, you can use an attribute with this specific name, return type will change. This is kind of admitting that, hey, PHP, we know that this would change, but I'm fine with the change, so don't complain to me right now. There are some changes with the globals variable. This should be a concern if you use this variable called globals, which is a very special super variable we have in PHP. If you try to override this special variable, or if you would like to make bulk changes, for example here, all of these code examples, they throw a fatal error in PHP 8.1. So there's no deprecations, it just throws fatal errors right away. So just make sure that you are not doing any of these code patterns, which could be a problem in PHP 8.1. There's also an ongoing process that we call resource to object migrations. So PHP has a special type called resource. They are not similar to standard class objects, and they follow very special code patterns. So we are step by step moving all of these resources to class objects. In PHP 8.1, we made progress as well. So we made our first batch of changes in PHP 8.0. We made some changes in 8.1 as well. The basic idea is that, for example, we have this FTP connection from the FTP extension. If you make FTP connection and expected a resource type, PHP will return a class object now. So for the most functions and classes, you don't really need to make any changes, but the real problem would be if you call isResource function, PHP will now say no, because it's not really a resource, it's a class object now. There are some deprecations in PHP. There's a lot of deprecations in PHP. The reason is that when we worked on PHP 8.0, there were massive changes to PHP 8. So we kind of postponed all of these deprecations to PHP 8.1 because it would be overwhelming if there were more deprecations in PHP 8.0 as well. This is not even a complete list of deprecations. I have written documentation for all of the deprecations, but this is as much as I can fit in one slide. I know it's too much. It's meant to be that way. So the most important changes are for internal functions. For example, strpos or string position or string replace functions. It was possible to pass null, although the function doesn't say that it will accept null. This is bad. Not bad. This is the wrong way to use a function. But starting from PHP 8.1, now it will complain saying this, you are not allowed to pass null to this function because it cannot work with null values. I saw mostly older PHP applications that had these deprecation messages popping up. So I think if you already have some PHP applications, this deprecation is one thing to keep an eye on. And return types, like I said before, with the tentative return types, they will emit deprecation notices if the signatures don't match from the PHP built-in class and the extended class or the implementation. There are many more other deprecations with the functions of specific constants, sometimes with INI values. There are just so many changes that I can't really go through with everything. But the changes that are likely to bite us or you would be passing this null to internal functions. And I saw some examples that strf time, they are to format time using the local time zone, which is not consistent, and we have better alternatives to use anyway. So these functions are deprecated. Auto detect line ending INI directive is also deprecated, which was used in many old PHP versions. There's even more deprecations that I have a whole list at the end of the session. Speaking of backwards compatibility, most of the features that are exciting, or rather new or major in PHP 8.1, they are unfortunately not backwards compatible. So we had enums. You cannot actually use enums with PHP 8.0 or PHP 7 or PHP 5 because it's using a new syntax. The same goes with section types. If PHP 8.0 or PHP 7 says an intersection type with one type, the and sign, and then the other, PHP doesn't know what to do with them. And so it will throw a syntax error. The same goes with read-only properties, finite class constants, and all of these changes. PHP will throw a syntax error. So unfortunately, most of the features that I talked today, we cannot use them with all PHP versions. So we have to make sure that we just upgrade to PHP 8.1 and make sure that all of our clients upgrade to PHP 8.1 as well. Some of the system changes are not backwards compatible either. So we talked about fibers. It's an internal implementation that has to do how PHP executes code and how it keeps variables and stacks, which cannot be used with all PHP versions. Although you can create a new class called fibers, it doesn't really function the same way. The same goes with the never return type. There are some functions that you cannot meaningfully bring back to all PHP versions. So the bad news is that these major system changes, they are not backwards compatible either. Some of the functionality could be polyfilled, as in you can create a new function in all PHP version. For example, that's a function called arrayIsList. It's a very simple function that returns true if the array has only a list of values and there's no sorry, it's not an associative array. You can create this function using standard PHP code, and that works. XS hashing algorithm, you can calculate the hashing algorithm in userland PHP code as well. Do the calculation by using PHP itself. It wouldn't be the fastest algorithm because it's still using PHP code to calculate, but it's still compatible with the hashes once you upgrade to PHP 8.1. Some of the changes can be accommodated as well. So resource to object migrations, there are ways to make sure that the same code works with PHP 7, PHP 8.0, and it continues to work with PHP 8.1. You might need to make some changes, but this alternative, it should work with all of the PHP versions. The same goes with all of the deprecations. Although we deprecate some of this functionality, we only deprecate the functionality that have better alternatives or functionality that we no longer need. So if we are ready to make some minor changes, we can make sure that this code will work with PHP 8.1 and also with all the PHP versions as well. Let's also see how we can try PHP 8.1 today. The easiest one is to use eval.org. So the link is 3v4l. Let's speak to say eval.org. And you can just paste the code and you can just run it there. It will just execute whatever the snippet that you put there using the latest PHP version, and it will show the results. If you are using Docker, you can actually pull a daily build of PHP. It's already compiled for you. You can just start to use PHP 8.1 that way. If you are using Windows, you can download compiled Windows binaries. One caveat is that you have to make sure that Apache, if you're using this Apache web server, you have to download VS16 version because PHP 8.1, it's compiled with VS16. So you have to download Apache web server compiled using VS16 as well. If you're using Nginx, it's completely fine. And finally, and probably the most appropriate way to try PHP is to just compile PHP by ourselves. I wrote a couple articles if you are using Ubuntu or Fedora or any of these operating systems in this line. What we do is basically we clone the PHP repository, we create a configuration file, we can file configure, and then we just compile. This is pretty much the standard way that we compile most of the open source projects, and it just works with PHP as well. If you would like to have more in-depth or more friendlier documentation, you can just follow these two links, or PHP documentation itself, which has enough information there too. So for the resources, you can download the slides to this talk from here. And like I mentioned before, Enums and Fibers, they are the major new features in PHP 8.1. And I have written very long documentations about enums and fibers and all of the features in php.watch. This is a documentation that I keep alive. You can also take a look at the PHP migration documents when they are released. So when on November 25th, we will release a new page on php.net, the official PHP website with all the features, the changes, how you can migrate to PHP 8.1, all of the resources. But I already have this documentation, so kind of promoting my own thing. Sorry. If you have any questions, I will be online on the chat. But please feel free to send me a message on Twitter or just send me an email. I will reply to all of them, regardless of how small the question is or how bigger the question is. And finally, thank you for having me here. It's my first time speaking in this meetup. Fingers crossed we get to finally meet physically sometime once this lockdown finishes. And thank you for coming to GroningenPHP. And I hope you learned something today. Thank you.